Saturday, so this is like, big tourist day. Okay, top 3 musical influences specifically for the Purple Mountain Majesty project would have to be 1, Dwight Yoakam, 2, Chris Isaak, underrated, highly underrated. 3, probably Doug Somm or just the Texas Tornadoes as a collective.
Probably number 1 is like the Everly Brothers, and 2 would probably be Chris Isaak, and 3 might be Dwight Yoakam. I think with Everly Brothers and Chris Isaak, especially lyrically, because they're just kind of universal, simple, relatable love/heartbreak songs.
Dwight Yoakam, Roy Orbison. I know Joe got real into Chris Isaak, and he turned me on to him, and I don't know, those are like the ones that jump out.
So as a band, I have, everybody in the band has a full-time job. We're grown men, about to be 38, so I'm married, have 2 kids, so time, and which leads to your energy resources that you feel like you're able to put forth towards an artistic endeavor. And so since we all have full-time jobs, I have 2 kids, a wife that I don't want to neglect. I'm also in graduate school, which takes time. And then I live out in Canyon Lake. You live in San Marcos. We've got 2 dudes that live in San Antonio, 2 dudes that live in Austin. So those are some of the challenges, I would say.
I think right now, because everyone who's in it lives in different cities and everyone has jobs and a lot of people in it have kids, I think probably just everyone getting on the same schedule and finding time to play together seems to be the biggest challenge. And finding, venues to play that everyone can attend and everything. You have half the band lives in Austin and half in San Antonio. That's a long drive for half the band, no matter where you play.
I know, like in a perfect world, if we lived down the street from each other and had some more time on our hands, we'd be able to probably to get together more. But I don't know that that's such a terrible thing. I mean, I think we've been able to do a lot with what we have.
It was just a hobby. It was just, we were living in Marfa when he started playing some of these songs, and we had a new baby, and we were just kind of, I mean, honestly, I was kind of bored. I was staying at home, and I wanted something to do. I liked to write when I was younger in college, like poetry and fiction and stuff, and I hadn't done that in a long time, and it was just kind of a fun thing to do, to work together and help him come up with ideas for songs and write lyrics together. I didn't really do much of the music at all. It was mostly lyrics.
Some of these songs were actually written out in Marfa whenever we lived out there, whenever I first started teaching. So like 2013, we kind of started to write some of these songs, and at that point I was still coming off of being in bands, and so it was still second nature. But then we wrote some of those songs, played like 3 shows as a band, the first incarnation of Purple Mountain Majesty out in Marfa, and then life happened, moved, and now I guess there's been a 6-year gap between that incarnation and this newest incarnation playing. So recently, always kind of sat on some of these songs, but really liked them and believed in them. And so whenever Daniel wanted to finish that newer Clay Nightingale record, I think maybe that was like the first impetus to like make music again. And then that felt really good, and kind of making that last Clay Nightingale album, putting that out on vinyl, was like, oh yeah, like we used to make music, and that's fun, and it feels really good, especially in our current circumstances of doing full-time job and being in school and kind of the grind of the rat race, day-to-day life. So having that artistic outlet makes just life better, right? Quality of life, because you have some sort of way to express yourself. So after we made that Clay Nightingale record, Daniel and me too both kind of said, well, as soon as we're done with that, we're going to pursue this new project, Purple Mountain Majesty, with vigor. And so most of these songs were written between me and Meredith, or between myself and Daniel, or a combination of all 3.
You know, it wasn't that long ago no one had a smartphone, or, you know, some of those things as readily available. I think being able to send each other video, being able to send each other clips of songs, sharing, you know, song lyrics and ideas, being able to like calendar schedule stuff together, honestly, as like dorky as that sounds, has really benefited us as a whole, I think.
It started off with like thinking about like our lives, like specifically like having a baby and how that like, you know, changed our relationship and everything, but then trying to kind of disguise that like specifically and just make it more relatable to any relationship. I do a little bit of a couple of things, but mostly I stay at home with my kids. I homeschool them. I do a little bit of online stuff when I can. I just got a job at a coffee shop, just trying to get some supplementary income and get out of the house a little bit. But mostly I'm home with the kids. My background is in education. I have a master's in education. Joe, my husband, is a teacher. I was a teacher for a short time too, but it was something that I kind of, as soon as I had a baby, I think I was working in a kindergarten, and I just knew that if I could avoid sending my kids to public school, I would want to, just because I've always valued freedom and spending time outside and letting them kind of self-regulate and do what they want to do, more or less. and valuing creativity too. And I think all of those things happen more when they're not at school. So it's not something everyone wants to do, and it's not something everyone can do, even if they want to. But it's something that we've made some sacrifices to try to do for as long as we can, and as long as they want to. If they want to go to school when they're older, certainly let them.
I work in education. I work for the Region 13 Service Center in the bilingual ESL department. We support the school districts in our region with professional development, instructional coaching, things like that. I've just previously, just a couple of years ago, worked for Austin ISD for the bulk of my teaching career, and taught in elementary and high school classrooms. I mean, honestly, living in Austin now, just my commute alone is an extra, hour and a half out of every day, pretty much, round trip.
I am a teacher. Taught for 10 years, currently teaching at Canyon High School, special ed. Done special ed for a while. Like having the summers off. It's pretty fun, but like I said, I'm working on my master's, so we'll see where that goes from there. I've always considered myself like a songwriter or a music maker, in terms that I like to put together chord patterns and like come up with melodies over those chord patterns. And I've written a couple of songs like in my teens and early 20s where I actually wrote lyrics and stuff, but never really had any confidence behind that, and always just kind of considered myself a guitar player and more of a side man. And so I don't know, I guess it was Daniel was always kind of the songwriter in Clay Nightingale, so I didn't really have to worry about the lyrics. It was more like musical contributions, and then we would write together, but he was in charge of the lyrics. So I guess maybe moving out to Marfa and not having access to anybody kind of forced myself to be like, well, coming up with these riffs, and I hear a melody, I want to write a song, but I can't, there's nobody here that I can rely upon, so I just started lyrically doing it myself. And then, of course, being self-conscious and wanted to edit it, I had to always show it to somebody. And so who better than Meredith, who, is a major study of Bob Dylan and a good, and your wife, that relationship, will be very honest with me. So it was kind of like, hey, I'm writing this song, and I kind of consider her my editor, even though also collaborator, because she will contribute quite a bit lyrically to some of the songs. In fact, I think there's a few of them where she probably contributed like 2/3 of the lyrics.
I think in the songs that I've had the most input in, or the biggest roles in, it's been Joe's playing something, and then I'm like, ooh, I want to help. I'm going to write lyrics for this, and I don't always volunteer, but in the past I have, and it's like, okay, and I just get, I ask him kind of like what the melody he has, and I go about it real methodically, like. So like this many syllables for the chorus, and this many syllables, and this many lines for the verse, and then I just find phrases that fit, and then I kind of build out from there. So it doesn't really start necessarily with an idea or anything. It generally starts with like a phrase, or like a single feeling, or a single problem or something like that, and then just kind of fills in from there. Lately, a lot of the writing process has been more of an editing one, I think, like looking at lyrics that Joe's written and being like, oh, that's really too cheesy or too sentimental. Like, I feel like you should change this one or something like that. It's always been collaborative, and it's just a fun thing to do.
I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I can remember meeting Joe in high school. We were both in bands together that were like essentially sharing the same rehearsal space over, you remember, like on like Whaley area over there in one of those storage buildings. And we we met over there, kind of hit it off about like punk rock music at the time, and have been fortunate enough to like live relatively close to each other over the years, off and on for a pretty long time now. And I think it just kind of happened naturally, having a common bond of being from the same place and both being interested in writing songs.
Being 16 or 15, I went to Longview High School, and you know, all of that other group of dudes went to Pine Tree. So really, I guess the link was Justin Wilson went to Longview High School, and he was in 2 Against One and friends with the Pine Tree guys. And so that was a link, and then Dustin PV and my parents were friends growing up, so always kind of peripherally knew of Dustin. But then one time we were at our mutual friend's house, who was his uncle, the McDowells, and I guess we like realized we were both into punk rock and into like the same kind of music, started hanging out again. And so then I guess through Dustin I met Daniel and that whole crowd. Went to Texas State. Daniel went to Texas State before myself or Dustin or John Mark or kind of that group of dudes that went to Texas State. We were all still, I think, going to like community colleges, and he went down there first. And then I think we visited San Marcos at some point, and we're like, whoa, this is really awesome. San Marcos is amazing. There's a river here, and Central Texas is badass. So we all ended up transferring to Texas State. And so Clay Nightingale came, I think Daniel was writing all those songs in a period before any of us moved there. So he was very solo, wrote that first record. I mean, I was living in Austin at some point, going to ACC. So, you know, I collaborated with him still. But then after that album came out, I was like, oh, hey, I actually want to pursue doing some live shows and making this an actual band. So after he made that first record, we all kind of ended up in San Marcos at Texas State, and then kind of made the first band.
I think at that point in my life, I'd only ever written really kind of rock and roll, punk rock kind of sounding stuff. I was in my early 20s, kind of newly like away from home, going to college, you know, kind of typical story. And, you know, felt like, you know, the music I was listening to at the time and was inspiring me, kind of singer-songwriter stuff that was kind of more folky, country, Americana kind of stuff. And I kind of felt like I could do this too, you know, and not, you know, kind of try a different genre. And I felt inspired to do that, and then wrote a handful of songs and started recording them, and then eventually said, okay, well, I guess maybe we could like make a band out of this and, you know, turn it into something more. And I feel like that's just kind of how it came about. It was encouraging, I guess. I think when I was younger and I was trying to play in a band as like a teenager, I didn't think of myself or any of our cohorts as being like a part of the world of music that I looked up to. And then something about being in Clay Nightingale, as small and sort of very modestly successful as we were, I felt like, oh wait, we're all like adults and we're playing music and people come to hear us play, and we made a record and things like that. And I think that kind of gave me a feeling of like, this is kind of how people do this, or you know, maybe we're on to the right track, or maybe we're on to something. Like in that time, you know, being in your early 20s, being in college, you know, being lucky enough to go to college, and being in a town like San Marcos that, you know, there's plenty of good things to do outside of school. It's pretty easy to get around, small town. It was a pretty, you know, as stressful as going to school can be for a young, like, college student, it was a pretty low stress environment in that regard. So I felt like whenever I had, like, a feeling to start writing some songs, it really wasn't all that hard. I mean, I had time and and energy and inspiration and just a lot less distraction, a lot less like life business to have to worry about at that age comparatively. Not to mention that at that age, I feel like your mind is just wired to, like, you can't really see that far outside of yourself as to what all else is going on. And in hindsight, I know that was probably a pretty self-indulged time in my life. But at the same time, I'm grateful for it, for having been able to create some things and see some things through to fruition, compared to being 38 years old now. It's like I still have that feeling sometimes of like being that age and like, oh, that's a cool little idea, I've got to pull over and write this down, or I've got to record it into my phone so I don't forget it, because I can't just go home and sit down and lay in a hammock and play guitar right now. I've got this and this and this to do first. And I know that's just part of getting older, and but in that sort of like Tom Waits sense of I don't want to grow up, or like that notion of like not wanting to do those things, I find that being like my outlet now of like, but I've still got this. I can still sometimes just sit down on a Friday night after everything else is finished and be alone with my thoughts and a guitar for a second, or and just sit down and try to write something. And every now and then it's something worth keeping. But even just the process of doing it is still very much worthwhile, and I get to catch a little bit of that feeling from before.
It kind of motivates me to keep being a part of it. As my kids get older, I feel like I have less energy and less time to dedicate, or to want to sit down, or to want to stay up late after they go to bed to like work on stuff with Joe. But seeing it performed and hearing it on recordings and everything, it's like, hey, that's fun. I wrote that, and it kind of makes me want to keep going and to keep being a part of it if I can.
I just think they're really strong songs. I think they wrote some really great stuff. I'm happy to be involved in it, and I mean, certainly between the two of us and having a long history of writing together now, they're the songs I'm the most excited about, or seem like a lot of people might like these songs, and what like he and Meredith have been able to produce. I think like in an increasingly busy life and getting older and growing up, that it's like that something creatively prolific is going on in their minds if they're pushing out this many great songs one after another. And I don't know, I've found that really impressive and inspiring, and I'm hoping to kind of like bring some of that same energy to the table as much as I can.
Doing environmental education can be very depressing, because you're constantly being shown the reality of the situation of state of climate change and all those kinds of things. But I guess overall I try not to, doing anthropology, like you're always thinking about like vast geological time and Earth being billions of years ago, and how many different forms of life have been on this Earth. So I feel like any stress or depression or concern or even joy or happiness that I think about the world, I always think in the grand scheme of things it's pretty trivial. So, I'm definitely feel pumped about my family and about where I live, and that I got to live in a place where I could pursue artistic endeavors.